Welcome to Genuine Gainz. I'm Meredith Mistro, and I'm here to help you find mental and physical wellness that feels true to you. Life can be overwhelming, and taking care of yourself shouldn't add to that stress. So whether you're seeking inspiration, practical tips, or just a little encouragement, you're in the right spot. We'll share real stories and resources to help you find your own path to wellness, one that fits your life and your goals. Let's make those genuine gains your way. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited about today's episode because I'm doing something different than I normally do. I am testing a video version of the podcast. So I say that with a little bit of discomfort because I find it hard enough to listen to my own voice. So seeing myself on video at the same time is a different level of torture. But I'm trying so hard to be chill right now, and I'm really hoping that it doesn't come off as awkward throughout this whole episode, but wanted to set the scene there because this is very out of my comfort zone. And to the point of today's episode, it definitely leaves me feeling like I have a lack of control because as much as I have tried to set the scene here, I've got my podcast recorder, my phone, my water, little ring light behind me. I've got the setting right. I still cannot control every hand gesture I make, every movement my face makes, where my hair goes, what I look like, what other people think of me. There's just a whole different group of insecurities to worry about when you're making a video. But I also know, even from my own experiences listening and watching podcasts, I love video podcasts, and I know a lot of other people do too. So find this episode on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're currently listening, of course, but there is going to be a YouTube version as well. And if it goes well, I will keep doing this. But that said, I feel like I had to preface this episode with that, again, in case things just go terribly wrong and I just have a meltdown. That would be actually pretty crazy. But as genuine as I like to be, I would not go there because I don't think anyone likes to see anyone go through a meltdown, especially not on a podcast where you think you're going to be learning something. So that said, let's get into the learnings that I'm excited to share with you today. Today's episode is something that stemmed from a situation that I've been going through over the past several months. And this is kind of my biggest life update as well. So I'm going to kind of hit my life updates with the reasoning behind making this episode at the same time. As I have mentioned in previous episodes, I've been going through a bit of a situation at work over the past several months. I definitely feel like it has consumed me and has become my entire life. And fortunately, at the time I'm recording this, the situation is, I guess, over. I don't really know what would constitute over because even though, I guess, physically speaking, I'm not going through it anymore, I think the effects are long lasting and I'm still feeling a lot of the feelings that are associated with such a situation. I know I'm being vague, just want to be careful as there are other people involved and I don't necessarily have bad blood toward anyone. It's not that kind of thing. It's just there were a lot of moving parts as I tried to find my next role at the company over the past few months. And I definitely experienced the feeling of helplessness and hopelessness as I realized my need for control and my trying in controlling the situation was not working. So that is what really spurred this episode. I literally feel like over the past few months at work, I have been trying harder than I have ever tried at anything in my life, to be honest. It's a little embarrassing looking back at how many measures I was trying to take to control an outcome in a certain way. There were different goals I had for myself, different areas I wanted to go into, different people whose approval I wanted, I guess, in a sense. And I was doing literally everything in my power to make those things happen for myself. And at the end of the day, it's not that things didn't work out. It's just that things went so differently than I expected. And it did feel really hard for a while because I had tried so hard to control the situation to go one way. And it was like, no matter what I did, that was not going to be enough, because at the end of the day, those external factors outside of my control won. So it definitely damaged my confidence a good bit, because I've been very lucky in that I think a lot of times in my life, I've seen my hard work pay off. And I've always kind of held this belief that if I work hard, if I exert enough effort into controlling a situation, I can supersede those external factors and find my way through to maybe not exactly what I want, but at least something good, or, something that will benefit me in the long run. This situation was unique in that, again, I literally tried not just at my baseline level, but I tried more than I would usually try to control something. And rather than it resulting in something that I wanted, it resulted in something unexpected. Again, not bad, and I'm good, but it just really was confusing to me because I hadn't necessarily experienced that a lot. And I know I'm very privileged and lucky, and I have all of those things going for me. But all the same, I just want to be real about that it was a very hard reality to face. And for a long time, it felt like no matter what I did, it just wasn't enough. And that meant there was something wrong with me. And maybe I just wasn't doing enough. Maybe I wasn't smart enough. Maybe I wasn't well connected enough. Maybe I wasn't communicating in the right way. Whatever. I went through so many different things, so many different questions toward myself of what was wrong with me, basically. And I could always find things that were wrong with me, but it still didn't necessarily explain why things happened the way they did. I'm also someone who, being a control freak, sometimes can really, really struggle with not knowing reasoning behind things. And if that's not made clear, I will overthink it and ultimately make it my problem. So this situation was a good example. There were a lot of things that happened that I wasn't really sure of the reasoning behind. I was really racking my brain for anything I could have done to make those things happen in the way that they did and make people act in the way that they did. And it was just eating me alive because I didn't really know, but it's easy to just put it back on yourself and assume that you did something wrong. So not only was I dealing with feeling hopeless in terms of not having control and having these external factors win, but I also didn't understand why my efforts were not working and what was wrong with me so that they weren't working. Now, obviously, sitting here even saying this, I know that this is very flawed logic, and I'm pretty sure any of us looking as an outsider into this situation or any others would say, well, Meredith, of course, there are always going to be factors outside of your control that can control the outcome of a situation more than you can as a person. And that doesn't say anything about you. It literally just shows that you or anyone alone is not always strong enough to control everything. And that's why life is what it is, If we all had this endless control, then all of our lives would be perfect and we'd have everything we want, right? So, of course, that is just reality. But when you're in a situation, in the depths of it, it's very hard to remember that. So, anyway, I just have been feeling really down about that, to be honest. And even though it's done, I will say, getting answers was really helpful because I at least had a direction, and I'm happy about that now, and we're all good. Not that I was super unhappy. I was just confused and upset with myself more than anything. But I still, like I said, am dealing with kind of the long-term after effects of that lack of control and the feelings around that. I think I'm trying to rebuild my confidence again, and also just shift my thinking around the concept of control, because, like I said, I'm someone who hasn't really had to deal with this kind of situation a ton in my life. So now that I'm actually hopefully old enough and mature enough to understand things better than maybe when I was younger, I can actually look inward and see what I need to do to ensure that I don't put so much weight into situations like this, and specifically their effect on my confidence in the future. So that is my, I guess, biggest life update. Work situation, not great, but I am now in a new role at work. I was about to say I graduated. I guess that's one way to put it. I graduated this rotational development program that I was in for the past 2 years. And I think that too is like a big transition in itself. You know, whenever you are in, whether it's a job or school or whatever, for a pretty lengthy time, it's going to be hard transitioning no matter what that looks like, whether it's something you want or you don't want. There's a lot that comes with change in general. And I feel like this was just another change on top of all the changes I've already been going through in my 20s so far. I feel like 20s in general, huge time for change. So there's always a lot of feelings associated with that, but I am very happy to kind of be in a new space now and, you know, looking forward to what's coming next. But the process of getting there, that's what I'm talking about here. That was crazy. So I am using that as the foundation for this episode. I think though, in other ways, I've also experienced a lot of growth recently in terms of realizing I don't have control not only over my own situations, but also situations with other people. And I'm not really going to get into that either, but I do think as I've reflected on my own lack of control in myself and what I do, always, you know, working out the way I want, I've kind of reflected too on the relationships in my life and realizing that I also have this tendency to want to control other people. And that makes me sound like a terrible person. I hope I'm not, but I also hope that this is relatable to some extent. I'm not obviously over here like trying to control people in the sense of like, I don't even know, like manipulating them to do what I want and things like that. I definitely don't go that far. It's really just an internal thing of, in my head, wanting so badly someone to just act the way I want them to act, or say the thing that I wish they would say, or be direct with me, or whatever, right? Like, there are so many things that I just sit here and think, I wish that person would just do that. That would like make my life easier, you know? I don't typically say that to people, but I think as I've gone through this situation of control in one area of my life, it's made me reflect on, oh, like there are other areas of my life that I'm also trying to be a control freak. And those areas are not always even related to me and my actions. It's like trying to control other people's actions. And that's definitely something to grow in as well. So I think all that to say, being a control freak has been a problem I've experienced basically my whole life. And before I kind of get into more of what I've learned through this, I want to start by sharing what I've learned about how this control freak nature can begin, because I know that I'm not the only one who is like this. And I think it's interesting, before just diving into, well, okay, what does it mean and how can we change it? Looking back to see, okay, how does this actually start? Because for me, I think I've been doing this recently in some of my episodes. I like to understand the bigger picture and the full story. So while yes, like obviously we want to learn how to change our behaviors, I think it's much easier to do so if we understand and can acknowledge and appreciate where they come from in the first place. So I did actually prepare for this episode, crazy enough, and did some research on how this control freak nature begins. And I wanted to share a little bit of that with you today, because I certainly see some of this ringing true in my life. And if you feel like you have a controlling nature as well, maybe some of this will ring true in your life. The first thing I found, though, and this was kind of the overarching theme for where the need of control begins, It says that the need for control is a hidden form of anxiety and linked to fear of uncertainty that can be created through a variety of factors that I'm about to go through. But it was really interesting to me. I read that multiple places that the need for control is actually anxiety. That makes a lot of sense to me because I've been open on here. I would consider myself a pretty anxious person in many cases, and so it tracks that being a control freak is a form of that anxiety. It makes sense though, right? Because it's like, your need for control is really you just being nervous about future outcomes of what could happen, what you might not be prepared for, or what you need to do that you're not doing to prepare for the outcome that you want. It's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, like the research said, of uncertainty. I think it also goes hand in hand with a fear of change, which is something I have had to get very comfortable with over the past several years. Being in a rotational program at work, I was changing jobs every 6 months. Even outside of work, I've changed a lot in my life in terms of where I live. I went to college in a different state than I grew up. I moved to a different state after college for work. I've experienced a lot of change in friendships, relationships, hobbies, health. Literally every part of my life has been constantly evolving over the past several years. And that, again, is just part of this phase of life. But I think if you're already prone to anxiety, then this need for control can totally take over your life, especially during a time when you're faced with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change, regardless of what you do. It's just part of growing up. Everyone has to make choices and experience change and experience uncertainty, especially trying to establish themselves in adulthood, if you will. So, like I said, hidden form of anxiety and linked to fear of uncertainty, but these different things can be caused not only by the stage of life you're currently in, like I just said, they can also be caused by a lot of things from childhood, which, I love to do some research on. Not really for any reason, I just think it's interesting. I think number one thing that a control freak nature could be created by is some kind of trauma, which, yeah, I know, I just said that. Trigger warning, I guess, in case you're thinking of your traumas now. Sorry. I'm gonna get reported and blocked. I'm not encouraging you to think about your traumas right now, but the more I say the word, the more you're probably thinking about them. So please stop. And just know that if you ever do want to visit that link between being a control freak and those experiences, that might exist, right? Because if you had a hurtful experience in any way, shape, or form, I don't think this has any kind of category assigned to it. If you just had a bad experience, you can be hyper vigilant to try and prevent that from happening to you again. And I honestly don't even think it has to be something super traumatic. It can be something that just didn't quite go the way you wanted it to in your life, and because of that you feel like, oh, I have to really be careful and watch out so that nothing like this happens to me again, because anything that leaves us feeling hurt physically, mentally, emotionally, we just naturally as humans are going to try and control our future so that that doesn't happen to us again. We don't want to feel that way or go through something like that. So that's a big one. Next to trauma, like I said, childhood experiences and family dynamics. I am now sounding Southern. I think this migraine medication is getting to me. I feel like sometimes after I take it, I start getting a little loopy. Did I already say I took that? Maybe I didn't even say that on this recording. I might have said that on one that I cut, because I have actually tried to record this 5 times and the video is freaking me out. So I'm just gonna keep going though. This is exactly when you want me to be recording a podcast, when I can barely think or speak. That's great. Anyway, family dynamics can definitely create the need for control. That was a crazy transition. But if you felt any sense of instability from your family, if you felt like you had to kind of control your parents or your siblings in terms of regulating their emotions, or you never really knew what was coming, if you just had like a pretty crazy family life, then it would make sense why that need for control could kind of extend into adulthood. I think it's really interesting because even in situations not directly related to where you built the control freak nature, it can still come out because it's so ingrained in you as a coping mechanism almost. I actually think that's a good way to put it. Like, the need for control is truly a coping mechanism to deal with the uncertainty and change going on in your life. And your family dynamics or other childhood experiences could certainly play a part in why you are that way today. But even beyond your family, I think who you surround yourself with in childhood and even now has a huge effect as well. Sorry, I got a text. I forgot to turn off my sound. I'm doing that. I am such a rookie. Anyway, who you surround yourself with now is equally important, because if the people around you are control freaks themselves, or you feel like you need to control them, like, that's not good either, you know? Like, you don't want to be around people all the time who are like crazy control freaks, especially when it comes to you and your actions, and you feel like you have to walk on eggshells around them. Like, no one needs that. So yes, I'm basically saying don't be around me because I'm a control freak. But no, I think what I mean by that is not just distance yourself from control freaks. It's be mindful of the people you have around you and the influence they're having. I think there are different types of control freaks. I think there definitely are the people whose control freak nature definitely comes out on other people and it's more of a vocal thing. And then there are people where it's very much internal and you might not even know that they have all of this anxiety and stress pent up, but it's there. It might not come out on you, but it's there. So obviously there are very different types of people to be aware of, but I do think it's helpful to look at your circle around you and say, okay, like, are any of these people influencing my need for control in my life or over specific friendships, relationships, family dynamics, whatever that may be. And by the way, I really am not saying cut people out of your life, like, don't surround yourself with certain types of people. I think it's just interesting to be aware of like how those relationships could influence this. You know what I mean? Finally, I think it's interesting when we look at where the control freak nature begins to consider different areas of your life, because I think sometimes a control freak nature can begin in just one area of your life that maybe you lack confidence in, or you had a traumatic experience in, and maybe it's limited to that, or maybe it started as something broader. But I think oftentimes, even if you feel like you have a need for control in every part of your life now, a lot of times it starts in one specific area as the result of one specific instance or feeling that you experienced growing up. So a couple of examples could be, social anxiety can create a control freak nature when you are worried about socializing and feel like you have to almost prepare yourself for any possible scenario that you could run into with someone, that you have to almost predict what they're going to say and create some kind of script in your head for how you're going to respond given any scenario. That in itself is a need for control. And that could have stemmed from maybe a social interaction you had or a situation you went through with people. I think a lot of times, like, people who have maybe been bullied experience this. Like, I honestly experience this a lot. Not to get into my traumas because I'm fine. No, I'm not. But this is not about me. This is about being a control freak. So that can definitely create a bigger need for control. I think another area, and this one I definitely have experienced, is something like performance anxiety or something related to work or school, in terms of feeling like you need to control the outcome of your grades or your performance at work by working as hard as you can, by literally preventing a situation where you would get a question wrong on a test, or like say something wrong in a meeting, or not know an answer to a question, like over preparing and literally, again, trying to control every possible situation you could run into in a performance setting. That creates performance anxiety, but anxiety, again, is a hidden form of the need for control. So they go hand in hand. So I think it's interesting to just think about it in that way. Like, okay, is there a specific area of my life where this might have started? And is that the only area of my life that I still feel a need for control in, or has it extended to everything? These are just, questions I ask myself, but you don't have to ask yourself if you don't want to. Anywho, moving on. Those are some of the things that can start this need for control. Now let's talk a little bit more about the specific symptoms, because I think I've been referring to being a control freak or having a need for control this entire time without necessarily diving into what that actually feels like. I think it's pretty easy to guess what that feels like, and if you've gone through it, which you've probably gone through it if you're still listening to this, then you probably know what it feels like. But just in case you need some more evidence that maybe you are a control freak or maybe you're not, I'm not trying to call anyone out here. Here are some symptoms you should look for. By the way, I'm not a mental health professional. I probably should have led with that. Whoops. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm here giving you the research I've done on reputable sources, okay? And also through personal experiences. So I hope that counts for something. I'm literally so not here right now because I've had a long day. That's it. Okay. Symptoms of being a control freak. Number 1, a negative mindset. Oof. That one kind of hit me when I read it, This, I don't think, is the first thing people think of when they think about a need for control, but when you start to really consider it, it makes sense. When you have this need for control, your base thought is either I will not be okay, or things will not be okay, or something negative like that, like I need to control for this negative outcome not happening. And you kind of view life sometimes with this negative outlook, because when you feel this need to control things, it's basically you assuming that things are not going to work out well, and you have to cover your bases and prevent those negative outcomes from happening, rather than starting from a base thought of everything will be fine, everything will work out in my favor, like blah, blah, blah. You are kind of starting with that negativity up front, and that's why you feel the need to control, because you're trying to reduce risk, reduce the chance of bad things happening. And ultimately, yes, you're trying to get a positive outcome, but in order to get there, your thought process is negative, which is not really as helpful as you think, but I'll get into that in a minute. Another symptom, having perfectionistic tendencies. I think this one might be a little obvious, but again, wanting to be a perfectionist with everything you do, every interaction you have, whatever it may be, you just want it all to go perfectly. Also, having high and sometimes unrealistically high standards of yourself first. So again, not only are you kind of starting with this thought of, I'm not going to be okay unless I control for all these things, but then you take it a step further saying, well, I have to control all of this. I have to be able to do all of these things. And you hold yourself to these super high standards. And I've been doing this recently with my work situation. Like, I was holding myself to standards that were literally impossible to achieve. Like, the things that I wanted to control for, like, no amount of work or networking or communication skills, I don't even know. No amount of that could, be enough. And I just also didn't have enough time in the day or mental energy to do everything I wanted to do in that situation. And that's often going to be the case. You're going to always feel like you're not doing enough, or you could be doing more. And those standards you set for yourself, like, don't get me wrong, I think it's really a great thing to have high standards, but there comes a point where the standards are too high and you're actually hurting yourself more than you're helping yourself, because you actually believe that you're capable of doing the impossible. And hey, look, I'm all about dreaming, but you also gotta have some respect for yourself enough to know your limits. That's much easier said than done, but high standards of yourself, huge symptom of being a control freak. I think to that point, having high and sometimes unrealistically high standards of other people is also a huge symptom. And I've talked through this already, so going to keep it short, but I think we expect a lot out of other people and feel like we can control them to live up to those high standards when we are in our control freak tendencies. And just as we can't expect ourselves to live up to these standards, we can't expect other people to either, because at the end of the day, we're all human and we're just doing the best that we can, which is not going to be perfect. Something else that really plagues me, I guess I would say, as a control freak, I just got this weird visual of myself in black and white, like I'm in the 1800s, going through the Black Plague or something. Was that in the 1800s? I actually don't know my history, and I'm very grateful that I did not go through the Black Plague. RIP to everyone involved. I'm not laughing. That is awful. Okay. Black and white mindset. This is my point I'm trying to make. When you have a black and white mindset, you also might be a control freak, because in your head, there is one right way, one wrong way. One right solution, one wrong solution. One right outcome, one wrong outcome. There's really no gray area, or you don't want there to be a gray area. You really want to believe that if you do X, Y, and Z, then you will get a good outcome. If you do not do those things, then there will be a bad outcome. Same can be said for other people. If this person would just do this, then my life will be better. If they do not do this, then my life will be worse. And it's that black and white thinking that can get us in trouble. It's also kind of an all or nothing mindset. That's another way I like to put it, because I would consider myself a very big all or nothing thinker. And I know it's unrealistic, but that's how my mind naturally works. Again, based on experiences I've had, it's either everything is great or everything is not. Either I do everything right or I'm failing as a human. That's obviously not right, but it does go to show why I might be a control freak. So there's that. Another symptom is over preparing, over researching, etc. for a specific scenario. Kind of brought this up earlier when I was talking about performance anxiety or social anxiety. This is kind of what I mean. If you're a control freak in any of those specific areas, you are going to feel this intense need to over prepare yourself, over research. This also goes hand in hand with having high standards of yourself. That might sometimes be unrealistic, because really, yes, you could spend 15 hours a day studying for a test, but is that really realistic or healthy? No, absolutely not. And you know that, but you somehow feel like you can beat that, and you can beat your own health and your own mind and your own body and push through and somehow succeed if only you put in one more hour. I think it just goes to show sometimes our standards are very unrealistic too. When we really look at it from another perspective, we know that studying 15 hours straight for a test without breaks or doing anything else, there's no way that our brain can physically retain all of that information. But somehow, I guess our own ego gets ahead and we're like, well, I have to say that I prepared this much, or, I have to study X number of hours in order to tell myself I have prepared to the fullest extent that I could. A lot of times it's literally not even true, but we put these expectations on ourselves that are more so a result of our own ego and the need to say that we did everything we could, even if it goes to the extent of, hurting our literal health and relationships. Don't ask me why I was able to explain that. It's not like I've been through it or anything. Anyway, the last symptom of being a control freak, I saved this one for last because it is probably one of the biggest ones I experience, and it makes me sad to say out loud. So I was putting it off, but it's the inability to relax. Anyone who knows me knows that I always love to be busy. And I don't think that at its core is a bad trait. I think it keeps you, keeps you young, keeps your brain growing, and, keeps you interesting because you're doing things, But I think sometimes it can be very unhealthy when you assign your worth to your level of productivity, your level of busyness, and it can be really dangerous when you view relaxation as a negative thing. I think a lot of times in my life, even if I've never said this out loud or said this to myself, I feel like I associate relaxation with letting go of control. And unfortunately, I associate letting go of control with, again, negative outcomes. So I feel like if I relax, I'm slacking off. I'm not meeting the standards I've set for myself. I'm going to fail in some way. I'm not going to get where I want to get. And I have just put all of these very negative connotations with relaxation, with having fun, with just breathing a little bit. And that is something I'm actively trying to change. So I say this, but I really am trying to grow. And I think I am, honestly, like even right now, I feel like I'm doing much better in this than I did a year ago. I also think, to be honest with you, and this is getting a little not personal at all, actually, but the work situation, like I said, put so much work into it for it to not go the way that I expected. I think it made me realize, like, wow, at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter really after a certain point how much work you do, whether it's actual physical work or just like working toward a specific outcome or mental energy that you're expending towards something. Like, I could have been spending half of the time I was spending working actually relaxing or doing something fun or doing something I enjoyed, and I probably would have experienced the same outcome. And that is really hard for me to say out loud and acknowledge and give myself grace for, because it makes me feel really dumb for putting in all the work that I did, when looking back, I'm like, I probably didn't have to do that, and I could have relaxed more without a bad outcome. But it goes to show that relaxation is important, and it's not always bad, like, I think it's very necessary. And if I had relaxed a little bit more, especially over these past few months, and not tried to make work my whole life and personality, then even if the outcome didn't change, I think I would have been more mentally stable. And, that would have been nice, but you live and you learn. And now I am taking more measures to really more intentionally add relaxation and fun and just hobbies into my life. And this podcast is one of them. To me, like, this isn't really work. It's something I enjoy. It's a form of relaxation for me, even though I'm still having issues with looking at myself in a camera. It's relaxing in its own way. And I am really trying to put more time into things like this, because I know that these are the things that fill my cup and make me happier. Not that work doesn't, but I think having a balance is always good. If I did this 24/7, I don't think I would be happy either. So all that to say, balance is everything. Relaxation paired with work is everything. I don't know why I went off on that rant, but my original point was that a symptom of being a control freak is the inability to relax, and that's what I'm trying to work on. So we're already at like 30 something, 40 something minutes. I don't even know. So I'm going to actually move forward and chat through how the control freak nature can actually affect you and what the opposite can do. What does it look like if you don't have a control freak nature? How does that affect you? Because I think it's really, really eye-opening to see the differences between someone's mental health and how they kind of share that with other people. when they are in that control freak state versus when maybe they are not. And inherently, as I explain this, you're going to find some solutions to your control freak tendencies if that is what you're looking for. So don't worry, the solutions are in here, I promise. But number one thing that really was a takeaway for me in my research, and I think I've really touched on this without explicitly saying it, but trying to create a sense of security, stability, predictability, control, whatever word you want to use, it actually can create the opposite more often than not. And what's the opposite? Well, it's more stress, more anxiety, more fear of uncertainty. And that is because you are ultimately focusing on these external factors to create a sense of well-being. I'm literally reading from notes that I took. So what I really mean by this is I think a lot of times we think when we are being controlling, it's because we think our work, we think our personality, we think some trait inherent to us is going to create the outcome, when in reality, we can do all the work we want, we can be the nicest person in the world, we can have all these perfect traits, but we really are relying on external factors to create the outcome we want. You know, we can study for those 15 hours for a test, but at the end of the day, we are relying on the test being something that we've studied for. We're relying on the teacher grading the test to grade it the way that is most beneficial to us and to not, have any bias or have a subjective opinion that's different than our own. The same can go in literally any other situation, but all that to say, we stress ourselves out, we hold ourselves to these high standards. That's certainly part of the stress and anxiety that being a control freak creates. But I think the deeper sense of stress and anxiety comes from knowing, even if we can't put it in words, that part of life involves external factors. And when we don't know how to deal with that, we let it stress us out more than we let it kind of calm us and relax us. And some of you might be hearing that thinking, what? How am I supposed to let external factors relax me? Because not being able to know what's going to happen to me is the least relaxing thing in the world. But I'll get there. I think it actually can be a little bit less daunting than you think. And it's all in your mindset and obviously how you frame things. But at the end of the day, as we all know, there are always going to be things outside of our control in which no matter how hard we work, no matter who we are as a person, we cannot change the outcome. So this thinking that it's all on us, that we're the only thing that really can change our outcome and our reality, that just puts a lot of extra work on us. Not only does it create more stress and anxiety, but it also really worsens self-confidence. That's another big effect that I've been discussing in this episode. Literally at the beginning, I said the biggest thing I've noticed from the situation I just went through was my self-confidence just going down pretty significantly, which is depressing. But I think it's even more depressing because I was able to see a lot of growth over the past several years in that area. And if you know me, I've always struggled with it, but I've been so intentional about building it up, and it felt like all that work I did on it suddenly was just being so tested. And because I was so exhausted trying to keep up this control of the situation, the self-confidence was a very easy thing to go, because it was already something I was having to work so hard to keep that once I got to a certain level of exhaustion, it was just okay, self-confidence is fallen, it's gone. And I say that kind of jokingly because I still think there's this deeper level of confidence I've gained, even through this situation. But on the outside, that surface level, it certainly went down. And a lot of that was because I was just beating myself up over and over again, trying to have this controlled nature to everything I did. So do not be like me. Please do not take me as an example here for what to do. Like, do not let your control freak nature get so bad that you feel your confidence depleting when you inevitably cannot control everything. I think something else to note here, which you've probably seen as I've been talking, is that it's better to take care of this issue, in a sense, sooner rather than later. So you might be hearing this and be thinking, well, I've been experiencing this for my entire life. Or maybe some of you are like, well, I mean, there have been situations where I have felt this, but I guess it's not that bad. It's not like an everyday thing for me. And maybe there are some of you true fans out there who are hearing this episode and you're like, I literally don't know what you're talking about. I've never been a control freak. If that's you, please come on and be my guest, because I need to learn from you. But all that to say, I think it's really important to take note of where you are right now and know that the earlier you try to nip this in the bud, the better. Because if you wait like me to recognize this for what it is, it's really, really hard to change, because it becomes such an ingrained habit. Just like anything, any negative habit, obviously, like the longer you go carrying that with you, the harder it gets to reverse, and the more exhausted you constantly feel by it. And it also affects how you interact with other people. This is something I've really, really tried to be mindful of, because my number one goal, I don't know if it's my number one goal, but that's the first thing I thought to say. A huge goal of mine is to not affect other people in a negative way with my own issues, if that makes sense. Like, I know that I'm a control freak and that's something I'm working on, but the last thing I want it to do is to negatively affect those around me, because that's not fair to them at all. However, I think to some extent that in itself is a controlling behavior, because when you're going through something like this, naturally there are parts of it that come out sometimes. You're going to say things that might hurt people. You're going to try and control people and, rub them the wrong way. You're going to say things, do things that just, do have a negative impact on those around you. And so while I would love to sit here and say I'm perfect and this is just an internal problem and it's never come out toward other people, I know myself enough to know that I have had that effect before, and that is probably my biggest motivation to change. Honestly, maybe even over my own confidence. I really just want to be a better person to the people around me, and I think working on this need for control is one way that I can do that, because I won't be taking that out on other people, whether directly or implicitly, and I think that is a huge step for growth. Of course, it's much easier said than done, but I think the big solution here, if you're kind of catching my drift, is building that self-confidence from within to know that you will be okay regardless of what happens. I think this is very, very hard to remember, and something that takes a lot of consistency and practice, and even then, I think we're all human and it's not going to be something that we always think. But I think we have to start attributing our worth to who we are rather than what we do or what we can control. Same thing like with other people. We have to attribute our worth to who we are rather than what other people might think of us, what other people might say to us, how people might act or not act toward us. And especially if people treat us in a way that we don't necessarily hope that they would or expect them to, that might not have been in our plan of control, we cannot let that affect our confidence in who we are as a person. That's something that should be internal and not changing regardless of the circumstance, regardless of the outcome. I have been in a lot of situations where, whether it's people, whether it's work, whether it's just anything external, something happens and it's not what I would expect, and I let that define me as a person. And there's so much more to you as a person than what happens to you or who is in your life. It's literally you, who you are, that determines your worth, and that's not dependent on anything outside of who you are. And that's a really freeing thought when you can have that and really accept yourself for who you are. Obviously, much, much easier said than done. But one way that I've kind of found to be helpful with this is something I mentioned earlier. It actually has a name. It's the law of detachment. I've started talking to some people about this in my life because I've seen other people similar to me kind of feeling like they have to control everything. And when I share this with people, they really do start thinking, and it's like, oh, well, it feels very counterintuitive to our habit, but it is kind of nice to give yourself permission to detach. So what is the law of detachment? Well, the law of detachment is trusting that detaching yourself from the outcome of something will bring about the result that is meant to be for you. This approach involves embracing uncertainty, not forcing anything like solutions or problems, staying alert to opportunities around you rather than hindrances around you, and even viewing those hindrances and problems as their own kind of opportunity. So if you recall all the symptoms I was sharing of feeling like a control freak, a lot of those were rooted in negativity. And the law of detachment is actually rooted in positivity and seeing the positive even in what might be your problem that you're trying to control. Looking for opportunities around you rather than having this one track mind saying this is the only way I can get what I want and closing yourself off to everything else. That's never going to work. So the law of detachment, yes, it sounds a little woo-woo, but truly like allowing yourself to detach from the outcome, that is sometimes what brings about the outcome that you want or the outcome that's meant for you and has the best long-term effect for you in your life. And to me, like I said, myself and my friends think like this goes against a lot of our habits, so it feels wrong because, at least for me, sometimes I've thought, well, wait, I can't just fully detach from something because let's be realistic here. I still have to work. I still have to try. I still have to put in effort to get the things that I want. I can't just sit around and wait and detach and hope that everything works out. Like, yes, there's still some level of work that we have to do, but something that I've learned is that if you are already experiencing tendencies of a control freak, wow, that was a tongue twister. If you're already experiencing tendencies of being a control freak, then you have the work ethic ingrained in you. And that's not something that's going to change just because you choose the law of detachment. Saying that you're detaching yourself does not mean you're just never working again, never trying again, because that is a positive quality that you have within you. And I've had to remind myself of this. Like, having work ethic is not a bad thing. Working hard for what you want is really admirable. And being a control freak, I've got that down. Like, I know how to work hard. I know how to have discipline and to put in 110%. And that's a trait I do like about myself. And especially knowing that, that's not just something I'm going to let go of while accepting the outcome. And I think the two can coexist, but that need for control and anxiety piece that can be toppings on, the work ethic, that is the part that doesn't need to be there. And you can replace that with another topping being detachment and working as hard as, you can, but also understanding mentally, like, it's going to be fine, and you don't need something to work out a certain way. You don't need someone to treat you a certain way in order to feel okay about your life and have that positive sense of self-worth. And that ultimately is what's going to bring you the best outcome. So that to me is a huge solution, something I'm trying very, very hard to implement. And I say all of that because I know if you're like me, your mind instantly goes to like, oh, I can't just detach. But no, you can detach while still doing the work and being a hard worker. It's okay. They're not mutually exclusive. So all of that to say, oh my God, I'm almost at an hour. This is insane. But one last little point that I want to leave you all with is how to actually start implementing this into your life. If you like the law of detachment, if you like the thought of, improving your self-confidence and not basing your confidence off of external factors, then my number one tip from what I've been doing is to start small. And starting small means literally choosing one little thing that you can do to choose yourself and to build your self-confidence when it's going to be tempting to not do that and to keep trying to control. So practice choosing relaxation over getting a task done, for example. Like for me, I think I have the tendency to just want to work until all of my work is done. And it feels almost easier that way because I feel like, again, I'm going to control having it all done. I'm going to control my performance, what people think of me, all of that. But again, I miss out on other parts of my life that could positively impact my mental health. And I'm not truly detaching in the sense that I trust that I can get the rest of my work done the next day if it's not an imminent deadline. So choosing to take an hour to relax rather than getting every single thing I have due for the next month off my to-do list, that is a good way to start small. Maybe try prepping less for something that you usually want to have a lot of control over. So for example, if you have social anxiety, maybe just experiment one interaction that is coming up. Try to not overthink it before you go into it. Try not to think of anything that person could say or any possible scenario that could happen, and just kind of let it happen and see that you actually have the social skills. You actually have the personality, and people are not always out to get you, and it's okay. Maybe try prepping less for a meeting or a test, which feels weird for me to say because I was that person in school who was prepping so much for a test. But there is a point where you overdo it. So maybe try studying 1 hour less. Maybe try, prepping your questions a little closer to the meeting rather than 4 weeks out, try just very small, nothing crazy, because I get it. You don't just want to go all in on this right away, but try small little experiments. That's what I like to call them, experiments. See what happens, see how you feel. And I think as you see that, these things are not actually going to affect me in as negative of a way as I think, and everything still works out, the more you see that, the more you'll be likely to continue more small tasks until you get to the point where you can start doing those bigger tasks and making it more of a habit to replace the habit of being a control freak or whatever it is. So that is all I have in my notes. That's crazy. I feel like this episode was a lot, so I'm going to let you take a breath and digest all of that. But if you did enjoy, of course, feel free to leave a review, a rating, follow, whatever you want. That's okay though if you don't want to, because really my goal is to help you, not to get a follow or a review from you. So if I helped you, that's all I could really ask for. If I entertained, that would be great too. I definitely feel like I had to be pretty serious in this episode, which is fine. I can be serious with the best of them, but I'm going to have a lighthearted episode after this because it takes a lot of brain cells to do this kind of thing. Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed. Yep, the episode's over, Meredith. Okay, I hope you enjoyed. I can't speak English anymore, so I'm going to stop, but I will be back next week, and hopefully with another video as well, if this all worked out. TBD. In the meantime, keep up with me on social media, and I will talk to you when I talk to you. Have a great week, and don't forget to stay genuine. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to Genuine Gainz. I hope you found something that resonates with you today. Remember, wellness is a journey, not a destination, and it's all about finding what works best for you. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration. Let's keep making those genuine gains together, one step at a time. Until next time, take care of yourself.